So keep in mind is if you have private information, when I turn the recording off at the end, you can always ask me that. Or you can, put it personally in the chat. I see Jen is here too, and she's getting set up, Jen Johnson, and she is my EA, and you can always ask her a question too, and she can field it to me anonymously. But otherwise, really love serving in the Enneagram world and have a background in clinical psychology before Enneagram with couples work as a focus. So also welcoming today, just couples questions in general. So first, let's talk a little bit about, hi, Jen, good to see you too. Let's talk a little bit about whether anyone has a question to start. And as I said, also feel free to share type if you want in the chat. But before I start with the 4, 5, and 9, letting you know a little bit about them, anyone have any questions? Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to come back to our slides here on withdrawing types, because that way some of you are visual learners and you can learn that way. So I love this quote by Sandra Cisneros. She is an author of a book I love, The House on Mango Street, about a Latino family. And she's just a brilliant woman. And she talks about withdrawing in a way that is understandable and positive. And I don't know about you, but I feel that a lot of people, especially even when I was researching quotes for withdrawing, consider withdrawing to be a very negative trait instead of a very balancing trait. And I think Sandra, just for starters, even outside of our Enneagram time together, reminds us that it's okay and it's balanced. And she says, I think my family and closest friends are learning about my need to withdraw. And I am learning how to restore and store my energy to both serve the community to the best of my ability and to serve my writer's heart. Oh, I just love that. And I don't know if you are a writer or if you are an artist of a different kind, or you're in science or domestic affairs, mostly at home. Any field, any stage of life you're in, I just hope that that really reminds you that we're really hoping that you feel nurtured in your need to withdraw here today and affirmed, but also that you can peek out with us to tell us either in the Zoom chat or just listen to some tips for how to come out in terms of relating with the 4s, 5s, and 9s. So maybe you're a 4, 5, or 9, or you're learning about these types today, or maybe you have a spouse of family member of these types. Either way, really just want you guys to feel that there's a lot of health to withdrawing and that there's reasons for it. Now, if you know some of the other stances, they're more assertive or more compliant. But these individuals, 4, 5s, and 9s, often in a social setting withdraw. And I really enjoy the way Truity.com describes the withdrawn stance. And I have a little typo there in the word stance we can just laugh at. Withdrawn stance types have rich inner worlds as they detach from others to find fulfillment within. In times of stress, they retreat into their minds and rely on their inner strength and knowledge to guide them to the answers and comfort they're looking for. I love how they remind us that there is an interesting and there's a depth to the inner world of the 4, 5, and 9. And even if you are, I see a couple of people I know here and have had rich conversation with either through our membership or through our coaches training or through other means. And we have a large Instagram chat going right now for 9s. But I really am noticing and hearing and loving to see that sometimes people go to the withdrawing space, even though that's not normally their stance. And this is why, because they realize, oh my gosh, I was missing out. I was missing out on a chance to recover, to replenish, and to allow my body's, instead of that sympathetic nervous system always running us ragged, to come back to that parasympathetic rest and digest state that feels frankly safer. So really grateful that we can process this together a little bit about the rich inner world. And as I said, Jen is here. If you have any questions you want to anonymously have her share, she can let me know. Or if you want to share your type in the chat, and welcome to those who just came, or to share any questions out in the chat, or even to add to that. We love to make sure you're seen in the presence if you want to be, knowing your withdrawing types. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about relationships with fours as we process, and then we'll do fives and nines. And you probably know, and if you guys can put your screens on mute, if you guys know somebody who identifies as or with a four arrow wing or as a four in relationship, you know they don't like to be rushed. But that's not because rushing is not it does have its place. But what it really reminds us when fours finally tell us, hey, I'm withdrawing, but one of the reasons is I don't like to be rushed. It's important to honor that, because for a type 4 who is also known as the artist or the individualist or the creative, and honestly, fours don't even like to be labeled. It's nice to just say four sometimes, right? Because we know as a core, fours sometimes don't feel unique or special, or they struggle as a heart type to really feel like they can understand themselves and love themselves without the acceptance of others. So there's a lot going on for fours internally. And when we rush them, they feel like it's even harder yet because of this aesthetic appeal they have of being a creative, being some sort of artist. And I've known fours who aren't fine artists, but maybe rhetoric is their positioning, or have a legal mind. There are so many different ramifications, technological mind, especially if they have that 5 wing, and we'll talk about fives. But rushing anyone who is producing something deep and meaningful often has a very negative effect. And I haven't had Suzanne, I have had Suzanne Stabile on in the past, and I have had her on more recently. I just haven't published her very recent interview yet, but she really reminds us about our withdrawing types, that when they finally can get doing something after all the withdrawing, there's this beautiful hue to it. It's a beautiful coloring, and she doesn't use that word, but I love color words. And she really acknowledges that there's a purity to the doing, because they're so wrapped up in some of the other aspects of themselves typically. So when you do finally give them time and patience in your marriage or in their processing, it's very important that you let them, produce beautifully, and they will. And I just had that happen to my 4 yesterday. I only could give her an hour of my time, and she loves to get 2 or 3. And she did really well on the way out and even during, but when we were driving home, she was just crestfallen. And there was nothing I could do to change that, except say, you know what? Today was busier than we thought. We had some unexpected out of town guests. But you know what? Thursday, we have time. And so I think it's important that you come back to a 4 if you did miss that time, because they don't want to miss it. That's going to be important quality time. And please make sure you let us know if you have an iteration on that and you are with a 4, a 4, and you want to add anything to it, be in the chats with us. Or as I said, let Jen know if you have any private questions. Also understand 4s don't want to be a cookie cutter. They are like, I'm authentic, and I don't want you to say or wonder why we're not like other couples. That's not going to work for me, because everyone is unique and they know that. And they don't want to have to struggle with knowing that you feel like they're second rate, or at least in their minds, like, wow, you just asked why I wasn't like Suzanne, or, not Stabile, but just anyone, Nicole, why I'm not like Harold. It's because I'm unique. And so don't try to pull them into that, as well as, of course, don't try to rush them. Now, we'll come back for conversation if anyone has questions or comments about 4s in a minute here. As you know, I'm trying to take my time with this type, because this is the type that likes time. And as I welcome new people into the group, just make sure you turn your camera on mute. or not your camera, feel free to be facing us, but just your sound, unless you're asking a question or making a comment. But notice that they can feel rejected also, if you don't at least try to understand. And this goes for loving them in times of date nights, as well as times of just going away and withdrawing. And if you don't at least try to come find them and see what's going on conflict wise, that can be very hurtful. But I want to just say, for those who are in a position of just wondering, how do I deal with a 4 who kind of does that push-pull thing? What do I do when I'm trying to have fun and meaningful connection with them, or I'm trying to get through a conflict? I think what you need to do is understand A, that they need time, understand B, you can't take their feelings from them. And I didn't write this down, but I want you guys to, if you're a note taker, this is a great one to write down. Make sure you know that they really, really want to make sure you know they can't just be understood like everybody else, and it's going to take time, and they're going to need to know that you get all of that. But try to be in the moment with them versus expecting them to just be happy all the time or sad all the time, because their emotions can't be. Just as I said, they want to be unique. They don't want you making them quote unquote happy. They're like, right now is the time to be sad. And quite frankly, they give that gift to you when you're down, and they let you be there. So although sometimes we want to pick 4s up from a space of melancholy, as much as we want that, we have to empower 4s to do that for themselves. So it's great to ask, what is the need? What do you have going on that I can be helped with? Or you might ask one 4 that you know, what would you like me to do in terms of staying with you right now or leaving right now? Would that be better for you to have some time? And by the way, this isn't an easy question for a 4, because they want you to struggle a bit with it. They're hurt and they want somebody to be hurt with them for a minute, but you have to set your boundaries too. And it's the responsibility of the 4 to tell you what the need is as best as they know. And they can even say that to you. Like, I'm not sure, but I think that I need a few more minutes to myself. But I'm just going to encourage people with a 4 not to shut their family and loved ones out for days. I've known a lot of people who can go from days back to hours, back to minutes. And I would say 30 minutes is a really good gauge to getting your heart rate back down and maybe having some journaling time. But again, 4s need time, and they need to be allowed to experience a myriad of emotions. So I would love to turn back to you guys to say, what do you have? You're not in my certification coaching class today, but I feel like we are a little bit as we share slides and talk. What questions or comments do you guys have? Or Jen, have you had any in the group either?
No questions yet, but one that I was just thinking that is very useful is, if a 4 gets stuck maybe in that space, what is some useful things that would be helpful to help get them out of that space if they are? And it's not the responsibility of someone else to do, but it's also just useful to kind of help to guide them maybe if they're unsure of what to do.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think that I like how Juliet here as a 4 really said, I'm learning to communicate my needs. And feel free, Juliet and other 4s, to chime in on this. But I think that when we hinted at withdrawing types coming into the doing space, it's a great recommendation for 4s who are struggling to get going in movement. I mean, I can't tell you what a joy it is to see 4s who are choosing, instead of letting the feelings lead, to let their bodies lead, or if it's easier for them, let their thoughts lead first, but something besides, something that is more doing oriented than just feelings oriented. I like the C.S. Lewis quote. He says, faith is reminding us of what reason once knew in spite of our changing moods. And so it's important for people with a 4 to realize that, especially. And you might say, I'm not a 4, but I have a 4 in my tri-type, or I have a 4 in my arrows, and I go to that a lot. I know a lot of 1s who go to 4, and sometimes there's a worry if I even spend time in that lament and 4 space, will I be able to get out of it? And now you heard me say, choosing to allow your frontal lobe, we could say it that way scientifically, to do the thinking, and to help you with the doing versus just the instincts or the more older brain pieces of feeling and instinct. So doing is so key for you guys. And maybe you've known 4s or you're a 4. Feel free to share in the chats what are some of the doings you do. You've probably heard me, if you know our Enneagram and Marriage podcast very well, you know I talk a lot about dancing for 4s. But I love hearing all your displays. Awesome. Okay, well, we'll come back to 4 questions and comments and keep the chat going if you want to add more.
I think Juliet wants to share something if she can have an extra minute.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Juliet.
Hi, I wasn't sure if that was how the flow goes.
Yeah,
I'm just listening. So I'm obviously as a 4, but I've worked quite hard on myself, and it's the Enneagram has been the biggest transformation thing in my life. So it's amazing. So now it's on the subtleties, but I don't always look like a 4A because I've worked so hard to not be on the pendulum swing, and I'm quite middle way. But now I sometimes feel I've blanded out. I can look like a 9 and I can look like a 7 in busyness and activity. So it can be, the levels of 4ness can be quite subtle, but the internal world of just watching the sink into that slightly pessimistic, it's like a lurking suspicion behind my ears, like it's this feeling of, and then I'm like, okay. And I'm so sensitive to it. And I just choose and I say, okay, so you can choose. I'm always coming back, but you have a choice, a choice. I always come back to my own power. And I've started dancing, like moving I'm trained as a dancer, but I don't do it now. So it's just in the kitchen, lots of kitchen discos. I have lots of when I'm cooking, I have music, and I'm in the shower, I'm just moving. So I'm always drop down, get out of the head and watch those feelings and what's true. Just try and use my 5 wing for objectivity. And I'm trying to always hold both, to hold the subjective world, don't invalidate it, but it doesn't have to take over. And I always, so what can you do? So what can you do? So what can you do? Instead of being victim, I just try and not stay in victim, my sense of victimness. I try and move out quickly. So that's what I've worked on. But the getting stuff done is the biggest challenge. The time to process, the creative processing time takes forever. It drives me nuts. But if there's a deadline, I hate it. If there's a deadline, the 3 wing, man, my sister says you do it every time, you pull it out the bag. And I hate it. I hate that pressure. I hate that external squeeze. The stress is so high. But I wish, so I'm trying to make it more measured, but with not getting lost when I've got time, I get lost. It's great. And because it takes time and connecting dots. So there's this dance between the amazing 3 energy that I can push through. So the 3s just do that on a much regular level. Just they can churn it out, whereas I can only do it at a crunch, and then I'm like, and then I need the recovery time. After something, I need like recovery processing time. So maybe that's a little bit of a 5-ness of what was that all about? What am I doing with that? So stuff can take me a long time to do, and it drives me nuts. I wish it could be quicker. And maybe that's a little bit of my 7. Oh, so interesting. What about that? What about this? And like the whole world's so original. Everything's amazing. So I get distracted by beauty and concepts and what about this? And I just can go into a myriad of thoughts and a whole of connections, and then I say come back really hard without an external deadline. So I'm trying to make that my journey. That's my own learning curve of trying to be more measured, and not always relying on that, not having that rush of a deadline, but trying to stay focused Yeah, it'll be a little more measured, more disciplined, more focused. Yeah, focus and discipline are like my two words.
Okay.
And the one thing,
Good.
what's the one
Yes.
thing? What do you just do it? Just one thing.
Okay,
No,
good.
do it.
Thank you,
Stop.
Juliet. That's
Anyway,
beautiful. Oh my gosh, that is so awesome.
sorry.
And I hope people, no, this is perfect. I hope people are writing down um because you're just like, I am a 4, like let me educate you. And thank you because you brought us some actual tangible ideas. And I just think it's refreshing. It's refreshing to have these different voices in, and I've never gotten a chance to talk to you before. So this is really a treat. But thank you for saying that. And I
Yeah,
love your
thanks. Yeah.
kitchen discos. Yeah. So
So,
we'll get to
and
5s in just a second here, but did you want to add one
Yeah.
more thing real quick?
just just one more thing. Just the melancholy. So because I struggle, that can be a shadow.
Mhm.
I just try not to stay there. So I've got a link to that preservation, the self-preservation that's quite sunny, the sunny for the brightness. So I can hide it quite well by being positive, because I'm really actively choosing positiveness and looking for contentness and practicing gratitude. Gratitude is the fastest shifter for sad, and also trying to honor real feelings, but not too loud. Like 20 minutes, like I have a rant with a friend, 20 minutes, and I say, I've got 20 minutes, just listen. It's all I want to do, and I'm done. So I give it a time. I'm allowed 24 hours. I did theater. If I didn't get an audition, I allowed myself 24 hours to wallow, the next, move on. So it's about allowing a time frame to experience stuff, but giving a cutoff point. I found that helpful.
Wow, thank
I'm done.
you. And she really brought us into some, I can tell you've been studying the Enneagram, you know your wings, you know the arrow movements, you even sound like you really understand that we have certain types that we're also high in at times. You mentioned you had a 7 sister, but you can hear that internalized in you as well. So that's exciting for people to hear. They're not also just one little personality type. Your whole goal of your Enneagram journey is to help you to be more expansive. But yes, to understand your main type, and she's given some beautiful gifts. So thank you for that. And we have deep dives on every single type on our website too. If you're ever like, I need a deep dive with tons of tips across seasons, but I'll give you our website info after. But she just gave you a lot right there. So hopefully you're writing, and she wrote some in the chat too. So feel free to add questions or comments. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Enneagram 5 space. And anyone who's a 4 also has a 5 wing and a 3 wing. So now we're leaning into this 5 area, and we're entering it's so fun because we get to talk about each of the centers today. We talked a little bit about how some of us come through our intelligence by way of the heart, and now we're coming to intelligence by way of seeing the world through the head with the type 5. Let me switch slides here. So do understand that for better and for worse, that these are what our gifts and types bring. Is every exchange costs a 5 or somebody with a high 5 space energy. It's very important that you know that, because it can feel very hurtful if you're in a 2 space yourself, or a very sexual 1-to-1 space, or you're just an intense social person. And we're getting a bit into instinct here, if you know instinct, but really I like for you to know this about 5, whatever type they are, and whatever instinct is, that they need time to process, because it feels excruciating for them to lose energy and be with others in the world, because one of the main issues for 5 is their defense mechanism of isolation, but also there's not a lot of comfort in the world, and for good reason. And I am talking to my membership group today about this later, but we really have a lot of male 5s out there. There's a lot of every type, and we could never get a perfect sample, right? Because these are just Enneagram people telling us, but there's a lot of male 5s out there. And why I say that is because it's important for you to know Enneagram, although a lot of people doing their emotional work tend to be female, there's a lot of people in this community who are men and who are saying, please understand me. I don't work the same as you exactly. And yes, this is a mean and an average, not an exact, because there's going to be men who are like high energy, high extroversion, high connectivity with my neural pathways. But this is something you need to know, that when I studied all of the types, that our largest group for men was 5, and it was much greater than for women, although there are definitely 5 women out there too. But I want you to know that when 5s are dealing with discomfort, they do like to move away as a withdrawing type, just like 4 and 9, and they like to think and consider. So even if you're in a marriage with them and you say, I want to think about this with you, I want to do this with you, because they're a 5, 6, or 7, they need time to consider. That's just the way their brain works. And just a
Guys,
reminder to turn off,
but
put your
hopefully
on
I'm fine.
mute if you can. And maybe Jen can scout for us if somebody doesn't know that, but I can if you need. Jen, just give me a holler. But otherwise, really important for you to know that they need time to process feelings in private because of the history of overwhelmedness. And it doesn't, have to be a cookie cutter that they were overwhelmed in all the same ways. It might just be that they're like, I get overwhelmed because I'm tired. Or in many cases, it's somebody overwhelmed me and overtook me. And I do not want to experience that vulnerability. And they have a lot of relationship to 8. If you ever know a 5, they have some 8 traits, and vice versa is true as well. So you might even be thinking, I forgot that I had a 5 trait when I was really here with you guys today. And you might have some 5 in you too that you didn't even realize. But it's important to realize that you're going to see some unhealthy shifts if you push a 5 too hard. You're going to see a wild state come out at you, because it's like, I could die here. Like, I don't have the energy that you're trying to push me to have. And my resources feel like they're meager. I feel like I may not have the competency of other people. Sometimes there's a health issue there as well. So you have to trust 5s that they know what they need. Another cool thing about your conversations with your 5s that can be highlights for your relationships and marriages are that 5s, more than any other type, have the ability to be completely objective because they're not as high on the emotional centers. So it's a wonderful gift to be able to process and brainstorm with a 5 who can really help you to have authenticity. And that's why I did this special Jane Austen episode, especially today, because I believe she was a 5 and really gives us a lot of scholarly and informative and even psychologically relevant and astute relationship information if we look close enough. So it's great to learn from our 5s, but we have to let them think and consider. Another huge issue, if you're trying to talk and process with your 5, is to give them transition time for context switching. I know recently I was sharing with a male 5, and he said, man, I finish up my work from home. As you know, many 5s now work from home after COVID. And he said, I shut my door and there was somebody pouncing on me the minute I opened it. And, what we've learned through this conversation, I've been seeing this person for many years as a helper. It's important. And there's brainstorms now. There's abilities to find different routes, even out of that room. But sometimes it's just transitioning by closing the computer, resting the eyes, and reading a book, one chapter. It might even be, as I said, slipping out of the room and going on a walk for some body grounding. But for all of us, it's going to be a deep breath sometimes, right? And you might even, as we're mid-talk here, have your own deep breath right now, where you just really take in a nice long breath and see how good that would feel if you were in that 5 space of forgetting that the world can also bless and give you energy, but that you also need your withdrawing. Now, I'd like to hear if anybody has any questions or comments about that 5 space, or just wants to add something to the conversation so far. And I'll come back to you guys and we can chat a little bit together if anybody wants to add to that in any way. And I'm going to read through the chat too as I wait.
I can ask a quick question just about maybe some people who have arrows to 5 or wings of 5, or just want to get into more of a 5 space. What would you encourage people to do to get into a 5 space? Because it is so useful to get into that deep thought and that research and all that focus. Any encouragement there?
Oh, I love that question. And we talked about this earlier this week.
I was going to say, because I'm asking for me and I need to get into a 5 space. Christy, you know this. So
That's
maybe
true.
you can give me tips and other people can too, because that is probably my weakest number in the Enneagram.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of you for coming so far in your 5 space. It's been such a joy because sometimes I give Jen 5 challenges, but we talk them out and we process. And you know what, guys, remember this about women and men and some of the differences, like the XX chromosome, the XY chromosome, like women are going to be on a different cycle also. So there may be some withdrawing in different moments. And that's something Jen and I even keep tabs about is, you know, where are you at if you need some different rearrangement of some of our tasks, because we have Enneagram and Marriage. We have so many task lists going, guys. So we can rearrange and rework, and we have a trust together. And that's what I hope you have in your marriage, is that you can speak about that and just be honest and open and authentic with your 5 space to say, first and foremost, here's where I am right now. And here's what I think I have capacity for. So I would say if we're looking to enjoy more of our 5 space, we need to find a time when we're not in our frenetic energy spaces. So probably not right after we've had our dose of caffeine. And it's like, hey, I had a fun time with my caffeine right there. But I spend a lot of time in my 5 space. Here we go. Sometimes we need the kick, but I have my herbal tea right here. And try never to have caffeine as a 7. But sometimes I do, and my family's like, did you? And I'm like, oh no, I accidentally did. But what happens when you're a little down and you've had some, perhaps this time where you've not had caffeine, or you're a little more tired, you can come into a focus that is a little more sedate, and you can be a little bit less wired and a little more, as I said, just not only authentic, but really, really allow yourself to be not so subjective. So that helps as well, because you're so subjective when you're wired, right? We're all more aggressive. We're like, I need this, I need that. It's a black and white thing. And when you can come back and calm down a bit, that's what helps. And for those who also are looking for even more types and have more energy and want to know, how do I get to the focus? Fitness might tire you out enough, or this is probably the biggest one, is first thing in the morning, try to have some time for quiet and reflection before the wheels are turning, before the coffee pot's on. So those are a few tips for that. That's a great question, Jen. Okay, and we do have a Courtney question here for everybody. And thank you so much for these chats. So helpful there, Haley. But how do I move to the confidence of an 8 without completely disregarding how other people feel? I'd like to access the strength, but I'm nervous to hurt people. That is so kind, and really reminds us that 5s are very relational. They're in the relationalist triad, which we talk about in our deep dive and on our podcast. But moving to the confidence of an 8, I like how you said, I don't want to move it in a negative way, because when 8s are not in a healthy space, when we're in our 8 space and we're overly aggressive and assertive, we can come at it without the care of the heart. But I think that for a 5, here's what I want to suggest, that you take time, because 5s need time. And as I said, with any planning type, 5, 6, or 7, you need to give time. They're going to say, I don't know, if you ask them a question, because they just need time. It's just the way they are with their thoughts. So don't feel bad about that. Don't try to be somebody you're not. You're saying, how can I come into instinct, but still take my time, in other words? And I'm going to say exactly that. But here's the caveat. With most 5s that aren't walking this journey of like, let's be super intentional, the tendency can be, I've thought about it for so long, the conversation is over, the book is closed forever. And that's so hard, because so many wait on pins and needles from feeling ghosted by a 5. And they would I just want to remind you, there's a joy in seeing a 5 come back to a conversation, even if it's sort of weird feeling for you as a 5, where you're like, whoa, I thought we were like way past that conversation. They're not going to like me anymore. But to be honest, I want to let you know, as a non-5, we love that. And I have several 5s that I work with, and different capacities. And it's so fun, even if I'm way past that and there's a 24-hour gap, and then they answer the question that I thought, they'll never address this. I probably pushed a little too hard, and then they answer it. So don't feel bad about coming back later. We would love to see you. And it gives you time in your heart center a bit, because here's the good news. 5s actually do have even a clean line with the fact that they're in the relationalist group along with 2s. They have some heart there. And so, yes, I know that they have, that 6 and that 7 and that 8 in their arrows, but they also have a 4 wing. So in addition to likening to the 2 in their relationalism, they liken to a 4, that they're like, I know how to lament and to feel, but yeah, sharing with safe people will also come in time, Courtney, so that some people might or might not be safe with the information. I know that's of such importance to you. Any other questions or comments? Oh my goodness, I'm scrolling in. Oh yes, go ahead, Julia. And I'm scrolling into the comments here, so I'm coming back to you.
So yeah, I have a neighbor who's a 5, and I have a very deep friendship with a 5. And when you're in that close circuit, it's like wonderful. The generosity, it's the complete opposite. Like, you get everything, and the feelings are really there, and it's very particular. And my neighbor, who I don't know very well, but we've just had recently a good walk, and I can just have these amazing conversations that I don't really get with other people often, because we're curious, we're open, but what about? And there's a bit of a challenge, and there's a bit of juice. So it really is the 4-5 dynamic, when it's at its best, is very hot, very juicy, deep and questioning, challenging, a little bit for the 4, for my emotionality. I can feel the challenge. I'm like, oh, I'm being poked. A bit of 8ness can come in there, and I have to, so when I'm trying to work, I'm always trying to bring the heart back in, but what about this? And don't reduce it too much. Challenge that with a bit of authentic, my authentic edge. And so there's a bit of a dance with both my 5 wing and my 4ness, and then their 5ness and their 4 wing. And when it's really magical when you have the space of to have those conversations, and they can really play well together. But when the 5 goes away or withdraws, the elusiveness, it is the one friend is on a WhatsApp, and it's there but disappeared and gone, and work takes over. But he's got a lot of 8ness, so in the beginning I didn't think he was a 5. I saw a lot of 3ness because of the culture and the condition that you're in as well, what gets pulled out. But then I can see it's that abruptness, that no feelingness is really hard. That's the what happened? And the pain is like, for the 4, it's like knifing every time. So then and I have to recover, and I want to walk away, never again. But because I don't want to quit, and I don't want to give up, because it's too painful. That's far too painful.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm so glad you don't give up, because 5s need you to not give up, also to not like supercharge. But I love how you're like, I'm not going to give up.
But the compassion for the 5 of the retreat, I'm trying to support the 5s to ask for help, saying, how can I support you? That activates my 2ness, my altruistic, please don't be afraid for quick support. What do you need? Trying to allow the 5 to not fall into isolation and their defense mechanism, but trying to encourage, when it's stress, to not retreat, to try and do the opposite and say, stay with me, hang in there. And then how can I make it not overwhelming, that my passionate helping is not too much?
That's
and really
huge. And I need to move on in just a minute because
Sorry.
I don't want to forget our
Sorry.
9. but then
Sorry.
I'll save some time for more because you share so beautifully, and continue on in the chats too, because those are so perfect for this. And then I do want to, I'm sure there are a couple of others with questions. Maybe we'll say 5 minutes at the end for a couple more. Okay. So thank you guys. And I'm going to let somebody else in here, just in time for 9. And, wow, you guys are just, this has been so fun. I didn't know, withdrawing types and those who would want to talk about that would show today. So I'm like extra excited that we are having our time together so beautifully. Okay, so relationships with 9s. We know that 9s are often, like you said, it's hard to just give a one label. We'll give a very brief, we said 5s are in the head triad and 4s are in the heart triad. And now we're entering our body types that are concerned with justice, morality, right, wrong, often feel that from the very gut. And they often, as 9s, also really take on a diplomatic view. They're just naturally able to not only know everybody's experiences in the room, but feel them with their bodies. So it can be exhausting to be a 9, I'm sure. And then also there's such a peacemaker gift here. And then we've talked a lot about this at Enneagram and Marriage, if you've been in some of our conversations or online with us or in our groups. But really just, it's hard because there's a lot of desire to keep the peace and keep the harmony, and almost feeling like that's the job because the world is so crazy and chaotic. But then there's even bigger, greater need for action and for becoming a peacemaker. So that is something huge. And for the new ones who came in, if you can put your speaker on mute, that would be so helpful, unless there's a question. But really helpful to know with 9s in relationship, to give them options. You may have heard this before, but I had a 9 actually tell me just 2 options would be delightful. I know we often say 3 options, but I thought 2 was even more straightforward. And 9s often talk about the age-old question of where do we go out to eat, and even just here or there can help a 9 to feel seen and heard. But much more importantly, something I received just this past week in my Instagram 9 chat via text was that they really want to not be interrupted, and really want to be heard. And so although it's on the 9 to do their own work, we cannot do other people's work for them when any of us are in that 9 space, but most particularly a 9. It's so important that we would sorry about that. My screen sharing got paused and I'm not sure why. So let me come back to that. So you can see that. Let's see here, resume share. Okay. I have no idea what happened. My dog walked in, but that should not affect it. Anyway, make sure that you are doing that, though. You're listening well and with care. Also, yes, body care and body work is so important for the 9. But even greater is them feeling like they're heard and that their spouse isn't dismissing them. That is absolutely vital, that they don't feel like their partner or their spouse or their friend is just pretending to listen, because 9s are very savvy. They want to be noticed, included, heard. And if they contribute in some way, they want to be not given any accolade above others, but just identified. So if a 9 spouse says, we did something fun together, tag them. Make sure you include them. If they shared a fun meme or story with you, share that they have a voice too. And there's a lot of theories as to why people don't share about 9s. I have 2. One is that they may be a bit jealous with 9s having so many gifts. Another theory I have is that 9s bring so much peace that we get sleepy around them and we forget them in that way, or they mumble. And so being a 9 requires you doing some of your activating in your body, maybe going for a walk, maybe getting regular massages, but it also requires that spouse to know, please do some of the workload, please include them. You see, I put workload on here also because a lot of the 9s I interviewed said, I do a lot of the domestic tasks in our home, and really appreciate when my spouse, without being asked, contributes, because they just know I'm strong, I'm capable, and I'll probably do it. So it's very helpful to hear that, no, this 9 really wants to have support. Even if they do it, probably don't want to have a fight with you about it. It's just, I'll do it. Or you hear the words, it's fine, because they want to keep the peace. But what we also want to make sure of is that you don't take advantage. And something I often want to tell 9s, if you're a 9 here, make sure you hear me when I say, you shifting in these ways might not be easy for your spouse at first. And I have upcoming projects I can't wait to share with you guys where I talk more about this, but I think it's a fascinating reminder to 9s especially, but to all of us, that when you start to do your work and lift up out of the shadows, it's scary and threatening and even just annoying to your spouse or your partner sometimes, or your friends, because we love familiarity as humans. And even if it's not the best thing, we're comfortable with it. So it's going to be a process, and it's going to be a disruption of the peace for a little while in order to have more health and peace long term. But do hear me when I say it is more health and peace long term. So for the 9, even for your joys and for your conflict processing, understand.
That means-
I hear what she's saying. It's
Can
Work-
you guys
work-
put your
work
screen
on
on
my-
mute?
for long-term.
Well, you didn't
Hold on,
hear
I'll
it
go ahead and do
before.
that. I will stop my share and I will try to find this person.
You
Um,
didn't
oh,
believe it before. Is that what you mean?
No,
Okay, I'll mute everybody I see who's on. Okay, almost there. I don't want to mute mine. I think we're all muted. Okay, perfect. We're almost in here. I can take some questions or comments, and I love to see the chat building up. But yeah, just make sure that you understand that some really good work has been done by a very simple weekly meeting with 9s. And even John Gottman calls these the State of the Union. We also have the Enneagram and Marriage Glow Planner. We talk about that a lot in the podcast because we have a space every single week, 52 weeks of the year, for assignments. You can pick and choose the ones you do, but something to keep you guided along in a neutral to positive way. 9s are positivity types as well. And again, you can find some of these deeper dive nuances of each type in our deep dives that Jen shared in the comments. But really, just so you know, 9s aren't going to want to go down into the dregs for hours and hours typically. So try to create fun weekly meetings that have something good about them. Like, we brought wine and cheese to it, or we always do this at the park, and this is our fun way to be in nature, because a lot of 9s like nature, but not all 9s. So make sure you're bringing comfort to this comfort-based type, this peace-based type, even within your conflict discussions, because it just means the world to them to know that you understand that they don't like conflict, but that they most 9s now at this point of their Enneagram journey, even if they're pretty early into it, they know I need to have some healthy conflict, but it's still not a natural stance for them. So yeah, that's big. And then not dismissing a 9. And if you are the 9 or you have a 9 spouse, just make sure you give them some time each day to decompress into that withdrawing stance. For those who are here at the very beginning, we shared a quote from a beautiful author that really reminded us that, health comes through withdrawing. Sometimes we need our parasympathetic nervous system to take us down from the heights. And so today we've really been talking about how to do that with all the types. And I have a few more minutes to chat with you if anyone wants to ask questions. Before I get to those, I just want you to know about our virtual spaces so you can keep aware of what's happening with us. We have in addition to the podcast that you can hear every single week on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen, you can attend our Facebook Enneagram and Marriage, or you can follow us at Instagram. And we also have our membership group opening up again in April for those who are just like, I want monthly trainings like this. I want to have spaces to talk. Those have been great. We also do extra podcasts for that group. And then I have here our email for enneagramandmarriage@gmail.com, but even the one I gave you earlier on the link with Enneagram and Marriage, Jen, Jenn, is great. And you can put that in the comments too, Jen. And then if you're like, I want the deep dive, I want to know me and my pairing, you can find that at enneagramandmarriage.com. Plus lots and lots of free resources. We put thousands of dollars into those because my 6th wing was neurotic. And I was like, we have to have really good resources that are free also. Because I know I love those. So anyway, any comments or questions about nines? And I'm going to read the chats while you guys do.
Krista, there's a great question here from Courtney. She's asking, both her dad and her father-in-law are nines, and ideas for making a male nine feel loved.
Getting to know we didn't talk about this, but because I briefly mentioned nines as comfort types, oftentimes you find an affiliation with a certain brand or sports team or something that really makes them feel like they're not just being seen as females. There's a lot of brain research that's been done to help us to know that not all men, again, this is a mean, but men are often doers. And so, sometimes you think about religious organizations being a little more geared to women, like we're going to process our emotions and we're going to sing these happy songs. And often men are more fueled by things like war and violence, soft violence, like a football game, or, I know even with my son, I'm like so nurturing and soft. And then he's like, oh, I'm making a gun out of this toothbrush or something. So finding the fun with men often learn through humor. They don't have the same emotional experience that women do. So fun, branding, all this kind of thing. Now, if you want to get to the emotional center, I would recommend with a male, like I said, men are doers. You're definitely going to want to bring in some sort of activity like a walk and talk. I know marriage and family therapist type 9, Michael Shahan, says that a walk and talk really gets him moving. And along with most men, especially because of the parallel processing that occurs, you don't have to be this fire in the eyes, forward conflict, heavy, sexual eyes here. It's just eyes parallel. Let's talk, let's walk, let's do. Great question, Courtney. Okay. Any other male or any 9 comments?
Quick question.
Yes.
My sister's a 9, and it's her anger. And I'm trying to encourage more of her this anger to come out safely, because it comes out when we least expect it, and we have we have no idea, and it blows up. So I'm trying to make it a safe space in my 4ness by listening and just saying, and agreeing with her, and thank you for sharing, and trying to make it really safe to share her anger. But that's in the blow up moments. So, and it is getting better, but when it's not in blow up, I'm trying to find the way to embrace it without it being in a blow up moment, to talk about, to try and encourage the deeper stuff, obviously as a 4, but trying to get it out, not when it's a blow up, because obviously she wants to avoid it.
Yeah.
And she's too busy, and she's a busy type of 9, very, very successful, a lot of 3 there. And so I don't talk to her often. And then she goes, when she does talk, there's a long ramble. She goes on, and I've got to try and pick out the pieces and make it safe. But I'm so grateful, and that's my journey, is managing how to encourage, to not let the anger be in blow up times, to let her express herself, not to bury it basically so often, and to let it come up for air more regularly, rather when it's too late.
Yes. And I think that I'll share, but anyone can feel free to share in the chats too, or briefly afterwards. But I think that I like how you're looking at you and her, because I think that when we try to change our 9 in a group, it's very hard to do. For instance, if it's between you and her, or afterwards, you can say, I can perceive especially since you mentioned you're a 4, that she might be annoyed by something, but not yet to that volcanic eruptive space. You can address it then and say, I notice sometimes when we're with this group, like I'm going to have that actually with my 9 today. And she's a bit more liberal than our friends who are conservatives who do. We're dissecting a kidney today. And she'll often be like, they don't get me sometimes, but they want to. And so I always try to make space for that, but she still feels it. She's like, they don't always get me. So what I do instead is I make space for her to talk that out with the people she feels most safe and comfortable with, which in your friends, family case is you. So we can't expect them to just like force a 9 to talk where they don't. 9s can be the most stubborn of all the types. And so, but we can say in our relationship, it's sacred to me. Another thing you can do is just address when you hear there's a mumbling. You can say, I really hear you, but it's hard to hear you. Could you speak a little louder? Could you be a little more active? But understand, and maybe a 9 wants to write down something here in the comments, but it's going to feel like the reason I don't is because you're not listening to me. So you have to be ready for them to say that, and then ready to take your own deep breath and say, all right, I'm making it a commitment to be a better listener to you right now. And that might be a commitment you have to make 10 times in the same conversation, not verbally, but at least to yourself. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. And she is, and I'm learning to ask her if we have, especially at Christmas, she hosts Christmas, to say, and I'm learning to say before, as soon as I arrive, saying, please let me know if you're feeling build up tension. So to create her awareness because we got it just about okay in Christmas, but something happened and I had no idea that I had done something, and she did tell me afterwards it was manageable, but I could feel her stress of the fear of rejection, her voicing. And I wonder if I ask her to say, let me know anytime, how can we adjust it in the moment? How can we shift it when you're feeling build up of tension, so that it's safe maybe for her to express, to create her own awareness. And I don't find out afterwards. Again, I find out I can adjust myself. Maybe that's what I've received just now. Thank you.
Yes, and you added to this too, Juliet, so much today and even right now by reminding us that we can address it and be so caring in our family experiences and maybe create a better environment. And then briefly, I was going to say, because some of us come at things more intensely, easily, or just naturally, like a 9's never going to prefer to do that, even if they do feel it. You might even say, maybe it isn't going to be that we solve a big thing today or an injustice that you feel deeply, but how can you still have fun? And I know not a lot of 9s in their 3 space who love competitive games, and they find it as a fun, almost vindictive way to like bring out their fire. That's pretty innocent. Like, I beat you at Monopoly so bad today. And that just made me feel so good as a 9. And once again, I'm active and I'm healthy because I was able to find a bit of justice in a fun, positive, light way. But I also really, yay on games, Jessica, but I love what Jessica said too. Trying to connect through stillness. I was shocked when my 9 said that to me. I was very shocked because I'm a 7 and I like silence better than stillness. And she's like, being still. Like, I was like, how do you experience God? And she's like, in stillness. And she thought that was everybody's experience. And so I just love how we're all nuanced. And then also we have a question for Jen as we close up. And before that, just know our resources, know everything. We do have to close out. So if Jen could take that conversation to a different space with Courtney, maybe get her email, that would be great, just so I can stop the recording and get to my next meeting. I'll give you a moment for that. But it's a 1 question. So we're going to leave today for withdrawing types. I love it. This is what I want. I want you to ask questions about all the types. That's what we're here for. But I hope everyone had a good time today. And I really did. I was so blown away by your awesome questions and comments. So thank you so much for being here. And I'll see you guys soon. And we'll put this up in we'll send it out in the email as well when we do our regular email so that you can have this on recording. Okay. Bye, guys. Thanks.